You have a woman who just opens fire and shoots her husband. And the question is kind of like, well, why? She's a great mother. She's a great person. She has a nice family. She's never been in trouble at work. Now, what I learned right away was that there was a history of domestic violence. What wasn't clear immediately was how extensive the history was. There had been one police report made by a neighbor when her husband dragged her out of the house by her hair and punched her in the face repeatedly on the street. They're going back and forth, and he comes home and she is massaging his feet and trying to calm him down and trying to tell him that everything's going to be okay and speaking with him. He's not calming down. He's telling her that she's horrible. He's finished with her. He's going to kill her, telling her, I might have said it before and I didn't do it, but this time I mean it. Like, I'm going to kill you. You're worthless. You're nothing. You're garbage. And I have a case in front of me where she's already told police she did it, and her kids were at home, which is also not a good thing, right? It's a complicated thing.
I would have been in that group of lawyers saying, what am I going to do?
Right. She was beaten and raped within an inch of her life, and she did leave him and she did get away. But we had her and we had an ex-wife, all of whom were available there ready to testify, and the judge would not allow it. She would not allow the expert to talk unless Marsha Thompson waived her rights and testified.
That can't be the law.
It's definitely not right. Her husband started stalking him, and the judge wouldn't let this in.
Can you see how the judge essentially nitpicked which witnesses he or she was going to let testify?
My mom killed my dad. I need to go home. Somebody beat me up. I need to go home. Like, it's just, people have trauma and they can't really deal. I mean, I had one person get up out of nowhere and just like sort of proclaim, like, I will not convict this woman.
In courtrooms across America, lawyers take on the impossible, standing against the full weight of the state and winning. The Iron Gavel podcast brings you their stories, not guilty verdicts, dismissals, and the fight for justice. Subscribe now and share with those who believe in the power of the jury trial. Today's story is one where the client was accused of killing her husband, shooting him 9 times while he was either unarmed, asleep, or laying down. A battered spouse expert revealed 20 years of psychological, physical, and sexual abuse the client had endured. The jury agreed with the defense, leading to a favorable outcome. Today's guest is attorney Jessica Mishali. Did I say it right?
You did.
All right. So, Jessica, before we dive into your case, can you tell my audience a little bit about you and your background?
Sure. So I've been an attorney since 2007. I grew up in the Miami area. I went to law school in New York, and I started at a private law firm, but quickly realized that I wanted to fulfill my dream of being a public defender. So I went to the public defender's office and I did exclusively defense of the indigent for almost about 10 years before I started my own practice.
What inspired you to become a criminal defense lawyer?
It's been a passion forever. I've wanted to be an attorney since before I can remember. I heard from my parents that I started talking about it when I was like 4 years old. A few different things without saying too much. I've had some issues in my own family with the criminal justice system and people going to jail, being arrested, and having to deal with that as a family member and seeing what that feels like from that other perspective. I think that's important. I also realized at some point that I had a voice, that I cared about people and that I could speak for them, that I could understand people and why they do the things they do, even though to others it was flabbergasting. I think it's an empathy that I have, and I'm able to kind of see what's behind and be the voice for that person.
That's great. I think a lot of us that get drawn into this, either we've had personal experiences with law enforcement, which I have had some not so pleasant, even when I was doing absolutely nothing wrong. But we also have family members and friends who are deeply entrenched in the criminal justice system. You do develop a sense of empathy, understanding, although what they may or may not have done is wrong in the eyes of most, that let's peel back the onion and get to the core, the root of the problem.
Absolutely.
So what's a typical day like for you?
My days are so crazy. I have two boys, they're 6 and 10. One of them kind of is a part time homeschooler. So I actually homeschool him for a couple of hours a week. So I work around that. They're in two different places on two different days. I'm in court on Zoom. I would say almost every day of the week. I practice family law as well as criminal law. So majority of family law is still online. So I have Zoom hearings. I'm in depositions, mediations most days of the week. And I also have, of course, the constant client phone calls, emails, motion writing, and everything to sort of handle. So it's a lot. The schedule is really, really hectic. I also appear on court TV at least once or twice a month. So that's another commitment I have in the morning. So if I don't have court, I'm usually doing that.
Okay, cool. Court TV. Maybe one day I'll get the pleasure.
I would love to see you there. We could comment together.
What would you say is one thing that the people or the public in general often misunderstand about what you do as a criminal defense lawyer?
So I think it's a very misunderstood profession. And I'm constantly asked by people who I thought were normal until I get this question. And the question is, how can you do it? And when I get that question, I suddenly realize how different I am from most of the people out there who look just like me. Because to me, it's not just that I can do it. I sometimes hear people saying, like, oh, I can do it because I believe in the justice system. No, it's not that I can do it. It is that it is a calling for me. I love doing it. I'm happy to do it. I'm proud of doing it. I feel like I'm fulfilling my purpose in this world when I do it. And I also feel like I am adding to the justice system. The system is somewhat broken, but there are still good things about it, and you can still bring something positive to the situation. And I absolutely think that criminal defense does that.
I think you kind of answered the very next question I wanted to ask you, which was what sets you apart from so many criminal defense lawyers out there. You call it a calling, and one of the things you feel drawn to do. Would you say more about what sets you apart from other lawyers?
I think what sets me apart is a few things. One is I care, right? And I think lawyers or even people, especially women, are afraid to say that they're sympathetic because it might come off as weak, right? They're afraid to show too much emotion or too much of what they may be feeling. I'm never afraid to do that. If there's a victim in the case, there is always going to be 100% sympathy on my part as to how I feel about what that person went through or what their family is going through. That's something totally separate and apart. When it comes to defending someone, so first of all, there are people who are innocent, like Marsha Thompson, which we're going to talk about today. And just for those rare people who are fully innocent, it is worth the job. But even when people are guilty, like I said, I was a public defender and I loved doing that. I never felt bad about defending people because what I knew the entire time was that if they would have been rich and they would have been born into a life of privilege, they would not be going through what they're going through. And if they would have been rich, and I saw this every day, and they would have committed the exact same crime, they would have had a lesser punishment or a lesser sentence. So even in situations where I did have to defend people who did horrible things, I did not feel bad about my job. I knew I was doing something that still brought more equality into the world than was there before I came along.
I love that response. One of the things I tell people is that, oftentimes we have clients that are guilty of something, right? It may not necessarily be the charge that they're charged with, but if my client is guilty as the state alleges, then what's a fair sentence? Because maybe it's not a situation where he or she goes home today or tomorrow, but we're there to ensure there's some fairness in the way justice is handed down.
Yeah, I agree completely.
So I want to talk briefly about something I can relate to, but not fully. So you're a trial attorney, a female trial attorney with a family, and I do know that a lot of women tend to shy away from trial work because it doesn't allow family time. And men typically don't have that issue. Like I have kids as well, but I'm able to still be pretty active. So for the women out there, first I want to hear about how you balance being a mom and a trial attorney, because that's a unique skill in and of itself. And what advice would you give to women who want to pursue a career as a trial attorney and also want to be parents?
So you said it right when you said balance. It's all about balance and time management. So for me, and again, this might be something I wouldn't have said when I was younger, but now I have no problem to say my children absolutely come first. I don't have to pretend that they don't matter or that my work comes first, because my results speak for themselves. And being a mom first doesn't take away from the way that I lawyer. In fact, I think it improves it. Being a mother every day improves my empathy every day. It improves my understanding every day. It improves my caretaking every day. It improves my ability to sort of dissect situations and see them for what they really are. So being a mom comes first. And luckily, I've been in practice long enough and I work for myself. So I can sort of choose what I do. I don't take every case. I take cases now that really align with me, and I make my schedule a certain way. So I am there for my kids every single day after school, except when I'm in trial. So I'm not on, let's say, a trial list to take cases from the government or anything like that, because I'm not in a position as a mom to take a large number of cases. I can't have a practice where I'm running 100 or 200 cases the way a lot of people do. I don't do that. So it's a private practice. I typically carry 25 cases. It's a combination of family and criminal. I have a paralegal and I'm really able to manage it. When I'm in trial, I have other resources, I have childcare, but it's never for too long. So, for example, Marsha's trial was about 2 weeks. I still had dinner with my kids almost every night. But they're used to seeing me at 3 or 4. Instead, they would see me at 6 or 7, and it would be a rough 2 weeks, but then it would be over. Family trials are 1 or 2 days, and criminal trials, they actually really get to trial maybe once or twice a year, and they're usually not as long. They're usually a little shorter. So I'm really able to manage it by being more selective about what I do and also managing my time. Typically, when my kids go to sleep, I work.
So, wow, that's great advice. And I tell people that's how I'm able to be a parent and a trial attorney, because I have 6 boys and 1 girl.
That's amazing. I wish I had more. Like, honestly, 2 feels like 20, but I still wish I had more.
3 or more is total chaos. I tell people if you have 3, you can have 10, because the chaos starts with the third one. 3 of them play pee wee football. And then I have an 18-year-old that plays college football. So my Saturdays, like, I'm going to get up at 5 a.m. to get all the little ones to their games. After their games, I got to drive out of town to my 18-year-old son's game. And I'll probably get home about midnight Saturday. So my Saturday is full on top of football practice 3 times a week. And unless I'm in trial, I'm at practice with them.
That's unbelievable. Luckily, my kids are more laid back. They're a lot like me. I mean, anything they ask me to do, they'll absolutely do. But typically, my weekends are we wake up when we want. I live in Florida, so it's a lot of beach. We're always like fishing, kayaking at the beach, swimming at the pool, at nature centers. We like to be outside a lot. We actually spend summers in Georgia in the mountains. So it's a lot of hiking. Actually, for Marsha Thompson's case, which was 5.5 years old when it went to trial, they kept setting it every summer. And I kept cutting my summer short, coming back to Florida, and then they would
No
reset it.
trial.
Yes,
That's the life of a trial lawyer. Many, many resets. Let's hear about this case. Marsha Thompson, is that her name?
that's her name, Marsha Thompson.
So give us an overview of her case.
Wow, it's so much and it's so many layers. I would say, at first glance, it is a case where a woman is charged with shooting her husband 9 times, like you said, when he was either asleep or laying down and he was unarmed. So she was initially arrested. The police decided to arrest her for second-degree murder. But the way that it works here in Florida is that once someone is arrested and the police kind of put a charge, the state attorney's office is actually the one who decides the charge. And the state attorney's office decided to take it to a grand jury for a charge of murder in the first degree. The jury did bring back that indictment, and she was charged with murder in the first degree.
What are the potential penalties for that charge of murder in the first degree?
For that charge, there's only two options: the death penalty or life without parole.
And by life without parole, I believe Florida is like Louisiana. That means if you live to be 100, you are in prison until you die.
Absolutely. So that's exactly what it means. And in this case, the state was not seeking death. That was not very early on. Let me know that death was waived. It was not a death penalty case.
So this case ultimately swung in your client's favor due to a history of domestic violence, from what I understand.
Yes, exactly.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So at first glance, she gets arrested. She's a woman. She's so much like me, and we're very good friends now. So I immediately just sort of knew that something more was going on here. It was 2019, so she's 39 years old. She's a mother of two. She's an employee of the government. She works for the federal government. She is sort of like just a wonderful, perfect person by all accounts, right? So she's a great mother. She's a great person. She has a nice family. She's never been in trouble at work because we all, I guess, at criminal defense lawyers, we look at law enforcement or any kind of authority and we immediately think they're bad. But she's not bad, right? Like she's never even once in her entire career been accused of being rough or inappropriate or doing anything wrong on the job or anything like that. So you have a woman who just opens fire and shoots her husband. And the question is kind of like, well, why? Right? Why? So that's what it looks like. Now, what I learned right away was that there was a history of domestic violence. What wasn't clear immediately was how extensive the history was. And to be honest, I learned more and more about it throughout the almost 6 years getting ready for a trial because she was not capable of explaining a lot of it. When I first met her, which was she hadn't even been in custody for 24 hours. It's very rare that people hire me before a magistrate hearing. And her family came to me and begged me to go to the magistrate hearing. I had a 5-month-old baby at home. I almost didn't take this case, right? It was a Saturday morning hearing and I have this baby that I'm nursing and they want me in court at, 8:30 on a Saturday morning.
It was meant
Um,
for you to be on this case.
it was meant for me. It was totally meant for me. So I meet my client, and she is what I would describe as just a shell of a person. It's not the, oh, help me, I didn't do anything wrong. It wasn't my fault. It was his fault. And, call this one and call that one. It was nothing like that. She could barely speak. She could barely tell me anything. And right after that, I went to go see her where we could really sit down for a long time. And she was able to tell me a little bit more. I also had an investigator, a private investigator, go out and talk to her right away to try to get as much information. And when I say right away, I'm talking about within a day. And I also had him go to the scene of the crime, which I think turned out to be important and is something that I would recommend to defense attorneys. I had him go to the scene of the crime as soon as the scene was closed and look around and photograph the entire scene. And he found a lot of things that were very important that we would have never had as part of evidence if he had not done that. So we started to slowly unwrap how bad the abuse really was, how long it went on, and how bad it was. And I would say within maybe 2 or 3 months, I had retained an expert who would look at the case.
So one of the things, and this was advice from myself as well as other criminal defense lawyers, I wrote down one of the things you said was she wasn't capable of explaining the history of domestic violence. What did you do to break through and get through to her and get her to open up to you or your private investigator or your expert? What strategies did you take and would you recommend?
So it's a few things. I think one is people, maybe because I am empathetic, people relate to me really easily. I don't have a lot of problems with my clients. Even as a public defender, I think public defenders get like such a bad rap when really they're doing the work that needs to be done. And I did not have that issue. I didn't have like a bar complaint from a client in 10 years. I really didn't have problems. There were times where we would go at it because I have a personality too, but like at
That's
the end
right.
of the day, they knew it was going to be right. They knew I was going to do the job. So she and I connected immediately. Her parents, who chose me, because she really didn't have a say, she's just kind of like sitting there lost and hopeless. Her parents chose me. They liked me right away, but I connected with her right away. There was just a lot of crying, and I really didn't push her for answers in the beginning. I asked her more for who could I speak to that could give me more information, right? And that might not apply in all cases. Some victims of abuse are really alone. There's
That's
nobody who
right.
knows about it. They've never reported it. There's nothing out there besides for what they can tell you. That wasn't the case here. So here there were people, not that much, right? With 20 years of abuse, she herself had never reported it to the police. There had been one police report made by a neighbor when her husband dragged her out of the house by her hair and punched her in the face repeatedly on the street. And so she indicated to me that of that incident. So I pulled the police report from that incident. She indicated to me that a friend had come to help her, like a police called a friend to come and pick her up. And she also had a baby and was pregnant. So I reached out to that friend. She indicated to me that another friend had once observed something. So she sort of started telling me things and letting me know who I could speak to, right? And I started speaking to those people myself, and often having my investigator initially speak to them so we could kind of see where they were at, starting to get to know them. She told me about incidents that happened at work, so I spoke to her boss. And so as time went on, she was able to fill in the blanks and tell me more and more and more. But in the very beginning, I spoke to these people, and I had to work extremely fast because in Florida, she's being held without bond on murder in the first degree. And we're entitled to a bond hearing, but we're not entitled to a bond. And I have a case in front of me where she's already told police she did it, and her kids were at home, which is also not a good thing, right? It's a complicated thing. There's kind of no doubt about her guilt whatsoever, and it's murder in the first degree. So I have to think of, well, how am I going to get her out? And so usually this defense, I would say, would take quite a bit of time to develop, and it did, but I had to develop a lot of it within a month. Within a month, I had her home. So we had
Oh,
that bond.
wow.
We had that
Wow.
bond hearing within 1 month. We got a bond. It wasn't cheap.
No bet.
It wasn't a low bond. And she was also on house arrest. Sadly, she couldn't go home to her parents because they live in Orlando. And when you're on a GPS monitor, you can only go within like a 3 county area. So she had to live with a family member.
What county were you in?
Palm Beach County, Florida.
Okay. A lot of what you said, I kind of packaged it into an answer that lawyers can take forward and use. I do public defense work too. I just started in June. I do LWOP only cases, so only life without parole cases. So they're either murders or first
Like
degree
sex
rapes.
cases. Yeah.
And I only have about 20 files. I've been a lawyer for 18 years. I've been in private practice the entire time until June of 2025. But I enjoyed, and one of the things you said that resonates with me is that I never have problems connecting with my clients. And they come from all sorts of diverse backgrounds, but some of the things you did in this case is typically what I do. Number one, you spent time with a client. You spent time with her, gathered information, who can I talk to? And then you went out and talked to those people. So these clients that are sitting in jail, all of my LWOP clients are incarcerated. The spending time with clients and going out and doing what you're going to do, like I said I was going to do this and I did it. You no longer have to say, hey, I need you to trust me. Like the trust is built by your actions. That's another nugget I appreciate you sharing. I think people can certainly take that and use it in any type of case where they're representing a person.
I agree. I think you're right on the money. I think the winning combo is those two things, showing them that you actually care, right? And then doing the things. I remember as a public defender, I had one mentor, and one time we went around visiting clients together because I was starting at that time just to learn how to do murder cases. So I was shadowing him, and each person he would see, he would like read poetry with them. He knew their family members' names, and I was so impressed. But then he didn't do anything on their case, like nothing.
Oh,
like, like there was like no legal work involved.
yeah.
like zero, right? I was mentored by other individuals who were the opposite, right? They were doing all this legal work and they really enjoyed like the challenge of the case and they were going all out, but they treated the client like they were nothing, like they were nobody. Right. And so neither one of those is going to work. Neither one of those is going to work. You need that combination for this to work. You really do.
I always tell my clients I go to the scene. I have a drone. I'm a tech junkie, so I'll go to the scene. I'll fly my drone. I'll come. I'll show them the drone footage.
You're making me look bad. Stop saying that on a
Ah,
podcast because when
get
my
you.
clients find out, they're going to be like, why don't
Where's
you have
your
a drone?
drone? I could imagine what your biggest concern may have been. So I want you to tell us what your biggest concern was in this case, as well as other issues that bothered you.
So the number one, I would say, is the fact that she had already admitted it. She immediately spoke to police and told them everything, right? Because that's the person she is. She's just a fully upfront, honest type of person. She had immediately cooperated and immediately told them everything. And so we were in a situation where there was no doubt that she had done it. There were no doubt that she had shot, and there was no doubt that he was unarmed at that time. And that's a pretty scary situation to be at. This is a case where now it may look easy, but back then, all the lawyers were like, this case can't be won. Like, why are you even saying this defense? Like, you sound stupid, like that's kind of what everybody was thinking at the time. But luckily, they were wrong. So, those were really the biggest things to overcome. For me, having worked on cases before, where battered spouse was an issue, I also felt I was relieved that there were some documentation of the abuse, but I felt that it was a challenge that there wasn't enough, right? There wasn't enough documentation to justify shooting somebody who's unarmed 9 times, right? So you have to kind of look at that balance just as a reality, even if legally it might not be required, but you're always thinking, well, what's the jury going to think? Because that's really all that matters. I don't think the laws matter as much.
No, no. I tell people all the time when a case goes to trial before a jury, the least important thing is the law. It's like the facts and the emotional component of the case. That's what drives the verdict. It's not the law. The law is boring. The law in and of itself, the way it's written, the way it's meant to be interpreted, that's not going to win anybody over. But it's the facts and the emotional impact of everything. You said something, and so I got to get you to do this. You said lawyers, colleagues, many of whom were probably pretty well established, formed the opinion that this case was absolutely unwinnable. So let's go through the incident itself. Give us a play-by-play of what happened on that fatal night or day.
So, what the police report kind of says, and they did some investigation. I would say the investigation in this case was really shoddy, right? It was really poor, which helped me as well. We can get into that, but it's almost like scary how uninformed law enforcement is when it comes to domestic violence. It's really unacceptable, especially I'm in Palm Beach County, Florida. This is a huge county. This is a county full of people who are educated. There's really no reason at this point for the police to not be responsible, educated, and informed. So, what happens is Terry Thompson, Marsha Thompson's husband, is driving home very late at night, going into the early hours of the morning, around 1 o'clock in the morning. And they're arguing on the phone. They're arguing back and forth on the phone. He is telling her how bad she is, how stupid she is, what a terrible mother she is. She got them the wrong backpack. Everything is wrong. She can't do everything right. She's a bad mother. And they're arguing back and forth. I find out later, by the way, he's driving home from one of his girlfriend's houses. So he's having this conversation with her on the way home from his girlfriend's house at 2 o'clock in the morning. And they're going back and forth, and he comes home and she is massaging his feet and trying to calm him down and trying to tell him that everything's going to be okay and speaking with him. He's not calming down. He's telling her that she's horrible. He's finished with her. He's going to kill her. Things like to that effect, verbal threats specifically of killing her, telling her, I might have said it before and I didn't do it, but this time I mean it. Like, I'm going to kill you. You're worthless. You're nothing. You're garbage. And this is kind of going on for, let's say, an hour or two until she has to go to work. So this is typical. It keeps her up, like terrorizing her all night. And then she has to be at work at 6 o'clock in the morning. So eventually she has to go get dressed. And he's like, go on, get out of here. I don't want you in the house anyway. You better go. And she doesn't know what to do because she doesn't want to leave. Her kids are there and he's in a real mood. And there's evidence that he was abusive toward the kids as well as to her previous to this. So she actually calls someone for work, tries to get coverage. She couldn't get in touch with the person. She goes in, she gets herself dressed. She's away from him from about 15 minutes. She comes out in her full uniform with her duty weapon and opens fire 9 times.
I would have been in that group of lawyers saying, what am I going to do?
Right. So, I mean, yeah, it's a really tough situation. I knew innately that there was more to it. And like I said, I mean, I fully believe in her. I don't have to say that now, right? We won the case.
Right.
And maybe I would even sound like a better lawyer if I was like, well, ha ha, we got this. You know, I can win any case. But it's not that. I mean, she was 100% innocent. As it turns out, it was more than just arguing. You know, she characterized it to the police as we were arguing because, again, she doesn't, at this time, she's a shell. She's someone who's been abused for 20 years. And when I say abused, I'm talking about extreme physical abuse, extreme sexual abuse, extreme having to watch her children be abused and choked by this man, right? So it's really intense what she's been going through, and the psychological. It's beyond. It's like he's stalking her. She never can be for a second alone. Every little thing she does, if a man looks at her, she gets beaten and raped, right? Violently.
Oh, wow.
So, and that's just a man looking at her. Part of the evidence that came out is that Terry Thompson was her first boyfriend. She's never been with another man. She's never slept with another man in her entire life. She is the most just sort of quiet and humble person that you can imagine. Not someone you can even imagine flirting or anything like that. But if he perceived it to be that way, that's how she was punished. So those things were unknown, though, at the time. Nobody really knew those things. She explained only very few instances of abuse to the police, only the ones that were documented, because obviously in her mind as a victim, she doesn't even think to say the other things. She's never shared them with anyone in 20 years. She's never told a friend. She's never told her mother. She's never told anybody. She's not going to just start telling the police right now. She tells them like, oh, you know, these 2 and 3 things happened. You know, one of them's in 2011. That's the time he was arrested. So again, that's one of the challenges because it's looking like these were the only incidents. And if that were true, even though it could be still battered spouse, it's much harder to sell to a jury. You know, if you want to a jury to understand killing an unarmed man, you know, you really need to show them how being in a pattern of abuse affected your brain and why you felt at this time that you needed to defend yourself.
So take us through that, because if we look at the newspaper headline of a case like this, we automatically assume things about your client that we probably shouldn't. And that's why we always encourage people to wait until all the facts come out and let the case be presented to a jury. So I want to know, how did you go about developing your defense strategy for this case that looked almost impossible to win?
The most important thing was to have an expert who was going to say that she had battered spouse syndrome, right? That was the most important thing. And we got that. And not only did we get an expert, but we got an expert, Dr. Michael Brannon, who I would highly recommend to anybody living in any state because he goes everywhere. He's excellent, and here's why. He has maybe 40 years of experience. He's very well respected. He's very well spoken. He testifies great, and the state trusts him. So many times when he comes up with an opinion, we don't end up in a trial because the state trusts his opinion. And if we do end up in a trial, it's amazing for a jury because I can say to him, okay, do you just take any case that you're paid for? And he's like, well, I'll evaluate, but I won't come up with an opinion that I don't stand behind. And then you find out that he's working for the state attorney's office very often. So the state attorney's office trusts him so much that they themselves contract with him, hire him, and have him as their expert in a case. So when a jury hears that, they're less likely to just assume, well, experts just say whatever you're paying them to say, which is, I think, what happens a lot. He also holds up to the questions. I've had experts that have just done me wrong once we get to trial. They've just done me wrong. I mean, they get one or two like little push questions and they just
They fold.
fall apart. They just unravel. Like, you would think they're the defendant, right? Like, you don't want your client to testify because one or two hard questions and
They just,
they
yeah.
just completely lose their minds. So I've had experts like that, right? Where like they have all the qualifications, everything's great, but they cannot hold up in court. Like, cannot. So he can, right? He knows what he's doing. And something beautiful is that he was able to say that he has been contracted by both defense and the state on hundreds of battered spouse cases. And only on, I think it was 2 or 3 occasions, did he find that it was actually someone who was suffering from battered spouse, which is really, really powerful.
It's like
When a
less
jury
than
is
1%.
exactly, it's really, really powerful. So he does a great job of explaining to a jury why, and really a great job of explaining to me, because so much of this case, and I think probably what took me the longest, is to wrap my head around all of this. And it's still very complicated, right? It's like you said, you look at it and it's just almost human nature to be like, well, she could have just left. She didn't have to kill him. She could have just left. And especially here, because in so many of these cases with victims of domestic violence, you have unfortunate situations where the victim is so limited. They don't have money. They don't have education. They don't have family. They don't have anyone who can help. They have no one they trust. They have children who rely on solely them to take care of them, right? This wasn't that case. And this was another challenge. A big challenge was that Marsha Thompson was intelligent, educated, coming from an extremely loving and supportive family. They've practically adopted me right now, and they're just the most wonderful people. I mean, just really, really wonderful people. And there's so many of them. It's not just like 2 loving parents, there's so many of them. So you would think to yourself, I think most people would think, like, why can someone like this not leave? She was also had a great job. She had a very high position. She was like a supervisor at the port in West Palm Beach, working for the Department of Homeland Security. Like, she had a high position. Her husband hadn't worked like since they met. He was not only living off her, he was like taking all her money and using it to go on dates with everybody else, with his girlfriends. He had like at least 6 different children from 6 different women, like during their marriage. He had kids previously from a previous marriage, but this was just during his marriage with Marsha Thompson, that he had all these different kids. And the police, who failed to interview anybody that actually knew about the violence, they did choose to go and speak to Terry Thompson's current girlfriend. So there was 3 women that he was dating when he died, right? And they went and spoke to those women. And those women explained that Terry Thompson was the most wonderful man in the world and that he was married to an evil woman. So they were told, like, Marsha Thompson is like this terror, and that poor Terry Thompson, takes care of the kids on his own. Meanwhile, Marsha Thompson's working at the port as a supervisor with a kid under each arm that she has to take with her to work because he's with his girlfriend. So there's nobody at home to take care of the kids. So it's really sort of like a very extreme situation in that sense.
So that's what I call there's physical chains and then there's psychological chains. And she was bound by psychological chains.
Oh, absolutely. And one important part about this case is that we had other women who were willing to come in and testify that he had abused them. So there was one woman that he lived with on and off during his marriage to Marsha. The way I found her is that she had filed for a restraining order. So I had about 100 pages of certified documents of him either being arrested or restraining orders being issued by either girlfriends or girlfriends' new boyfriends against him. The judge wouldn't let it into evidence, right? So
Of course
the
not.
judge here was very, very against us. I don't know if you watched the verdict. That's like kind of the only part that people watch. The whole trial is online. You can see it, but
I'm gonna go watch it. They don't allow us to record our trials here in Louisiana.
so this was televised. So this was recorded by Court TV.
Okay,
So Court
cool.
TV kind of watch everything. You can see my opening, you can see my closing, you can see a lot of important things. So she also wouldn't let these women come in. So we had one woman who, at the very same time as Marsha Thompson, she's in this relationship. Marsha Thompson knows about it, which is kind of what you need to show to bring this in. This violence is something Marsha Thompson is aware
No,
of.
that's right.
She knew about it, right? So the judge let Marsha Thompson testify to it, but she wouldn't let this woman come in, which I think is legally wrong because this is support to what Marsha Thompson's saying. Marsha Thompson can say anything. She's the defendant. And the first thing the state will tell you is don't believe a word she says. Okay, well, we have evidence to support what she says. This woman is here. She flew from another state and she's ready to testify. And she's testifying about abuse almost worse than Marsha's. She was almost killed by Terry Thompson. She was beaten and raped within an inch of her life. And she did leave him and she did get away. But we had her and we had an ex wife, all of whom were available there ready to testify, and the judge would not allow it.
You know what burns me to my core, and you can probably relate? If it was the other way around and your client, let's say I routinely have in sex cases, if there's anything in my client's past, dismissals, even not guilty verdicts, the judges will let it in.
Yep, there's your Williams rule.
Yeah.
10 years ago, they urinated in the back of a nightclub.
Yep. Yep.
They're a sex
So
offender.
I just wish there would be equality in the application of our laws and our rules of evidence. Like, if the state gets to have certain things, certainly the defense should. But
And it's so respective to the judge, at least here where I practice. And I practice in Miami, Broward, and Palm Beach primarily, but I've practiced all over Florida. It really depends on the judge. Some of the judges do their best to really do it equally. And there are
that's
just a
right.
lot of judges, whatever the state says goes. And that's kind of what this case was like. I did a stand your ground motion. I don't know if you know what that is, but
Yeah, we
Florida.
have it. Hmm.
Oh, you have it. Okay. So Florida has stand your ground. In Florida, you don't have a duty to retreat and you're able to stand your ground. And if you have stood your ground, then you should not be charged and a judge should dismiss your case. So we did a stand your ground motion. And the state argued that my expert should not be allowed to testify unless the defendant did. I argued that that's a violation of her Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. Nobody can compel her to testify ever. And to deny her expert is to just deny her a defense altogether. The judge went with the state and she did not allow him to testify. I chose to hold Marsha back because I thought it needed to wait until trial. I didn't think it was worth it to put her on the
Right.
stand then. And so we lost that motion. And luckily we didn't have to appeal it because we won the trial, but the judge made that call. She would not allow the expert to talk unless Marsha Thompson waived her rights and testified.
That can't be the law. No.
It's definitely not right.
I do want to go through each phase of the trial to see how, now that you've developed your theory or your defense, and then how you apply that to each phase of the trial. But before we do that, I made a few notes based on things you said. There was a lack of documentation of the abuse, even though it had been going on for 20 years. How did your expert deal with that in reaching his opinions?
So he spoke with Marsha and he spoke with her several times and for hours on end to kind of try to get to find out the information. And then he followed up with every single person that she mentioned would have known something. So, for example, she had chronic health issues, back problems, and things like that. Those were from being pushed around and thrown around. So he followed up and went to her medical records and confirmed that she had those things. And, there was no other explanation for them. She would say, oh, I fell and things like that. There wasn't like a car accident or a way to say, well, that was from this event. So it supported what she was saying. Her boss was instrumental. Her boss, again, this is a very highly ranked person who's very credible, would explain that Marsha Thompson was just always upset and alert, that every time the phone rang, no matter what kind of meeting she was in, she had to get it. And the people could hear her husband screaming at her. and like her just like running to submit and do whatever he wanted. She confirmed that Marsha had to bring her children to work like very, very, very often. And it was to keep them protected, to keep them safe, and also because her husband wouldn't take care of them, even though he didn't have a job throughout the entire marriage. So there were things like that. There was an incident where they were at a friend's house and he actually punched her. The friend did not see the punch, but she heard it. And when she came in, Marsha had a busted lip. That person testified at trial. There was the person who came that date of the arrest and helped Marsha go to the hospital and took care of her and her child. And she saw what she looked like after she had been beaten and she was pregnant. So there was that person. Also, her husband had been really, I think, coming off the rails because in less than 2 years' time, there was an incident where they all went golfing together and it was all with people from her work. And he got into a fight with somebody and went after them with a golf club in a serious way, like trying to hurt them. And everybody there said that Marsha froze, like she didn't do anything and that he was dead serious. He was going to hurt somebody. He first went after an old man with a golf club. And then later they were having a drink and Marsha said, I thought this would be bigger. And the colleague said, that's what she said, right? Like that joke, that's what she said. And her husband got up, flipped the table, went nuts. And after that, he started stalking this person. Her husband started stalking him, and the judge wouldn't let this in. I had this person available to testify, right? He was at the courthouse. I took his testimony outside the presence of the jury to preserve my record. The judge wouldn't let it in. Terry Thompson was stalking him. He was following him. He was sitting outside his house. He went into a strip club when he was there. He approached him. And this man said to me in a deposition, I am not allowed to carry my duty weapon when I'm off duty, but I was carrying it because I knew this man was either going to kill me or I was going to kill him.
Can you see how the judge essentially nitpicked which witnesses he or she was going to let testify?
Basically, anything that helped the defense was not coming in.
Yeah.
Like that's all the state had to say. This helps the defense. And then she'd be like, oh, okay, that's excluded.
That's terrible. I'm sorry, Judge, but that's terrible.
Terrible.
Another thing you pointed out, you said the law enforcement did a poor investigation. So when you say that, I'd like you to let us know what didn't they do that you felt they should have done in this case?
So something that really helped me is when the lead detective came into the deposition, I asked him, does he know anything about domestic violence? And he said, yeah. And I said, okay, tell me about what you know. And he's like, there's been like some classes and stuff, I'm pretty sure, but I don't remember exactly. Right. So I harped on that during this case. I really harped on it. And then I asked him, what about battered spouse? And he said the same thing, like, yeah, I heard something about a cycle of violence, but I really don't know anything else. And then there were all the people that Marsha told him about, right? She didn't tell him a lot, but she did tell him about the incident where her husband had been arrested. And so he knew that he could have pulled that. So he pulled the police report, but he never spoke to anybody. He didn't speak to those police. He didn't speak to her friend who had come there. And the few incidents that she did tell him about, he didn't go and speak to any of those witnesses. He really just kind of disregarded the abuse. And I think that he had made a predetermined decision that the abuse doesn't matter, right? That what you're dealing with in this incident is an unarmed man. And so the abuse doesn't matter. And I don't think he's educated or informed to know enough to know that that's not the case.
So let's get to the trial. And the trial starts with jury selection, right?
The trial starts with jury selection. Jury selection was, wow, it was a doozy. I mean, we talked to at least 150 jurors. When you deal with domestic violence, and there were at least 10 people crying, like, I'm sure you've seen this, right? Especially the more serious the case. I mean, when I've done trials and murder cases, it's like within 5 minutes, you have a room full of 50 people. Half of them are crying. My mom killed my dad. I need to go home. Somebody beat me up. I need to go home. Like, it's just people have trauma and they can't really deal. But this went really well for me because the people who would get emotional, you kind of squeeze it for what it's worth. And I mean, I had one person get up out of nowhere and just like sort of proclaim, like, I will not convict this woman.
Well, that person didn't make it to the back.
She didn't make it, but her statements remained, right?
That's
You
right.
can't unring a bell. So the judge was like so pissed because, of course, the judge is wanting Marsha to lose the whole time, you
Yeah.
know? But so she didn't make it, but it was great and it was really helpful. And then you also had the other side. You had a lot of people saying, hey, I was the victim of domestic violence and I found a way to leave. I'm not going to ever say that it's okay that she killed somebody. So you did have those. And I think that's something you have to deal with. You know, you think victims stick together, but not always. A lot of victims that even the woman who had previously been beaten by Terry Thompson said that. She went into details. And I mean, it was horrific what she experienced, absolutely horrific, and that she lived through it. And yet she ended it with, but I found a way to leave. I didn't kill him.
Right.
Right. She ended it with that. So it's hard. It's a tough situation because some people don't understand.
What issues, for people who don't know, in jury selection, we don't get to discuss the facts in our cases, but we do get to discuss the issues. So, what issues did you discuss, and how did you discuss those issues with the juries? Specifically, issues that you thought were vital to the defense you were raising.
So for me, I think jury selection is the most important part of the case, right? I actually think by opening, they've already decided what they're going to do. I mean, the closing is so emotional and you work so hard in it, but it's that opening statement.
That's
So
right.
in jury selection, I directly talk to them about self defense. I read the jury instruction about self defense. I directly talk to them about hearing from an expert, hearing about an issue called battered spouse. What do they know about it? I mean, I don't hold back. There's no like hiding anything. I get a constant objections, pre-trying the case. I just keep on going. Yeah, just keep on going. You know, in the beginning of my practice, I remember being young, and every time I got an objection, I would be lost, right? Like once the whole conversation was over, I was like, where was I? What do I say now? What do I do now? Now it's just, I'm like cool as a cucumber,
That's
right? I
right.
finish, the state can call me names, the judge can say whatever she wants, and then I just move on to the next question, right? So it was a lot of that. And I brought up everything, you know, battered spouse, hearing from an expert, being open to hearing from that expert. The state really harped on this word imminent because part of the instruction with self defense is that you have to be in imminent harm.
Right.
And she kind of, the whole case turned on this 15 minutes that Marsha was in there getting dressed. Even if you were to believe that, you know, he's threatening to kill her, first of all, he has no weapon. So where's the imminent harm? And also, she leaves the room for 15 minutes. So where is this imminent harm of her getting seriously injured or killed? It doesn't exist. So once I saw where they were going, this wasn't my plan, but once I saw this really heavy emphasis on this imminent thing, then I went with imminent. And I tried to show them that while they had initially said that imminent means immediate, and that's what she wanted, right? She wanted them to say that. And that's kind of the obvious answer. But then I went with trying to talk to them about how imminent might not be immediate. Could it be a day? And I got some jurors to say, well, yeah, it could be a day.
Ah,
Would it be, you know, could it be a few hours? Like, so things like that. And a lot of the jurors started to agree. And when it was time to strike jurors, I saw that the state was striking anyone who didn't say immediate, right? That was her strategy. So anyone who didn't say it, but she kind of didn't leave room for the fact that I had rehabilitated a lot of those people. Like once I opened their minds to having, you know, more of an idea of what it means, they kind of went back and didn't say that it had to be immediate anymore. So there was a lot of talk about that during the jury selection. I tried my best to evoke as much emotion as I could. I asked questions like, you know, I would call on a man, right, who I could kind of tell where his head was at. And I would say, is it okay for a husband to physically discipline his wife if she does something wrong? And he would be like, no, absolutely not. Right. And so I went kind of hard with that and I picked out the people who really needed to answer that question and look at that for what it was. And the goal of that was to put into their minds already knowing like this man was beating this woman. This man was beating this woman. So start with that. Start with putting your brain there and then let's get to the rest. Right. I also ask, like, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you trust me? On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you trust the prosecutor? On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you trust police? On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you trust the judge? right? And it really says a lot. And they answer the question. They think they like it, right? They like to get pulled into like little dramas and
That's
to
right.
to get to say things like that. So that's kind of where we went with that. And then, like I said, opening. I think lawyers really don't do what they need to do with opening. I think that is the one thing that is the most just it's a loss, right? Because it's your opportunity to win your case, right? That's your first impression. Like the oldest saying is like, you can't make a second first impression, and people judge you within the first 10 seconds of meeting you, right? That's your opening. And so many lawyers, I hear them saying, I don't give away too much at opening. I like to leave things open. I don't promise anything at opening because what if I can't fulfill my promise, right? I like to leave them waiting so I don't say too much and things like that. That is reserved for cases where you have nothing, in my opinion,
That's
right?
right.
That's reserved for cases where the state has the smoking gun, they have a video of your client killing the person, they have a confession, they got DNA, right? Then you can stay quiet. But if you have anything, you put it all out there. I started explaining to them what coercive control was, the cycle of violence, the years of violence, what she went through, what the expert's going to tell them, how he's going to explain it, his experience, how he knows what's going on, what happened that night, what were they fighting, everything in that opening. And I could see the connection with the jurors and what they were already thinking.
I agree with you. In rare cases, I've even seen defense lawyers waive opening. In Florida, does the state go first and then the defense?
Correct.
All right. So I always tell people, I say, look, your opening statement at a bare minimum, it's a roadmap to where we are today and where you want the jury to be at the end of the trial. So if you were to give somebody a map and say, drive from Florida to California, here's your map, and there's no interstate, how are they going to get there? Like, if you're going to give a roadmap, you need to put some markers along the road so the people will know where you intend for them to go. So I agree with you 100%. Jerry Spence used to say, I went to his trial lawyers college maybe back in 2012, I believe. He passed away earlier this year. But one of the things he would say is a good jury selection and a good opening statement, the case is over.
The case is over. That's all it is. Yeah, the case is over, and it's really, really true. That is your chance. Can you win a case without a good statement? You can, but it's much more of an uphill battle. Whatever you have, you better be prepared, and better put it out there for the jury so they know what to look for. Like I like to say in my real criminal defense moments, not so much the Marsha Thompson case because she's so innocent and everything was just really 100%. But in cases where I have to think a lot more outside the box, and I say that, like, I decide what the case is about, not the state attorney's office, right? Whatever narrative they might have in the police reports or whatever they're saying in the opening statement, it's my job to turn that around. And I love when the state says, she's trying to distract you. Well, no, I'm not trying. I'm distracting them. I'm distracting them. So good luck getting them back, right? Because that's your job.
The best defense is a good offense. That's what I tell people. Not shifting the burden of proof to us, but understanding I'm not just going to sit here and get punched on. I'm going to punch back. So now we go to opening statement. Prosecution goes first.
Prosecution goes first. They're talking about how she killed him in cold blood, that it was premeditated, and that's why it's first degree murder because she had all that time, those 15 minutes to really make her decision, and that she decided to do it, that it's uncontroverted, that he's fully unarmed, that, you know what, he might not have been the best guy. He might not have been the best guy. He might have been somebody who was perpetrating domestic violence, but it was minor, and it was also not at this time. At this time, she had every ability in the world to walk out that door. There was no danger whatsoever. There was no weapon, but she decided to use her duty weapon. She knows what she's doing. She knows how to shoot, and she killed him.
And how do you deal with that in your opening statement?
So, in my opening statement, I talk about how there's no doubt who shot Terry Thompson, but that when Marsha Thompson shot him, she was suffering from battered spouse syndrome due to 20 years of extreme physical, emotional, psychological, and sexual abuse. You will hear the details of brutal rapes, brutal beatings, of Terry Thompson attacking her children in front of her, telling her that he would kill her. You will hear from an expert that will explain to you the effect that all of this repeated abuse would have on the victim of the abuse. The effect is it changes their brain. The effect is on their autonomic nervous system, which this expert will explain to you what that means, how it works, how it happens, how the victim of abuse is in a cycle of violence, how they feel that they can't get out, that there is no way out. And it's more than just they feel there is no way out. Statistically, if a victim of domestic violence leaves, that is when they're most likely to be killed.
See, I didn't even know that. I didn't know that until you said it just now.
It's intense because it's not just what she feels. I'm not asking you to believe, like, oh, there's something weird going on in her head. She's mentally ill. And so she believes. That's not the case. She's right. Right. And there are factors to say, when are you most likely to be killed? Those factors are, have you ever been strangled? She has. Has there been more than 2 episodes of like a violent attack? Yes. Has there been sexual abuse? Yes. Has there been stalking? Yes. Has there ever been a threat with a gun or a serious weapon? Yes. All of these things are yes, 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 right? So she fits into every single factor that leads toward she's going to be killed. She's going to be killed. It's not just what is in her mind. He may not have had a gun at that moment, but he's telling her he's going to kill her. He's telling her, get out of here, go to work. And she's like, oh my God, if I leave, what is he going to do? And he's like, I'm going to kill you. So she's like, if I leave, he's going to kill me. If I stay, he's going to kill me, right? And everything is culminating after 20 years of beatings and rapes and abuse. And in that moment, she knows she needs to defend herself, right? And she's in her own home. So she doesn't have to retreat. She has the right to defend herself.
How long would you say your opening statement lasted?
Opening statement, maybe 20 or 30 minutes,
Okay.
and closing maybe like an hour and 20. Yeah.
So after opening statements, the prosecution begins to put on their case in chief, which means they begin to call witnesses. Who would you say were the most important witnesses they called?
Well, my favorite thing is that they only called one detective. It was a team of 5 detectives, homicide detectives. They only called one. And I think the reason being that all of them were kind of like lost and confused. They didn't really know much and they kind of gave different details. So on the day of, they just called the lead, right? He was my favorite one because he's the one who's like, I went to some classes and stuff, but I don't really remember, So he was definitely the best one. They called the initial officer on scene, who turned out to be great because he actually said that he saw the body in a different position than what we heard later was the position the body was found in, right?
Okay.
So it's like these officers, they're just making mistakes left and right. I'll say my favorite witness was the medical examiner, because the medical examiner changed what he said. He had initially said that Terry Thompson was sleeping. And so the prosecutor said that in their opening. And I was able to show in our deposition that he had said that. And he had now changed it to either sitting up or lying down. And he had to admit that there was no way for him. How would you know if he was asleep? Like, was there any scientific factor? And he was like, no, I don't think he was asleep. He didn't even read his deposition transcript before he came, right? For me, that was pivotal in the evidence. Even without the battered spouse, that was sort of important, that the state was just messing up. And then they also had an expert in firearms, and they tried to have this expert talk about which shots came first, right? Like that they were saying Marsha Thompson, shot him in the back while he was asleep. And they were trying to have this firearms expert. So they chose this expert who, like, honestly, this guy was so lovely. He had a Southern accent. He was adorable. He was very nice. He was from Alabama. And so I'm telling the jury in closing, like, who's this guy from Alabama? We live an hour away from Miami, CSI Miami, right? And they brought in somebody from Alabama who didn't make any sense in what he was saying, and who this is his first time testifying as an expert. So their expert had died pre-trial. They had an expert who's known everywhere as the firearms expert in the state of Florida. She's from somewhere like in the Panhandle, and she passed away. So they had to get someone else to take over. So that in and of itself wasn't great for them. But on top of that, they chose this person who had never been declared an expert in court before. This was his very first time. So it was kind of easy to argue up against him. And like, why are they bringing someone from Alabama? This whole thing is just like strange and doesn't make any sense. Like, I know that Alabama is like right after the panhandle. And so he actually was working together with her because they only lived an hour away from each other. And there were reasons why the state did it, but I still think it was a mistake. Right? It was a mistake. They shouldn't have chose that person. It wasn't the right decision for them and it didn't go well. They also had their own expert on battered spouse, and that person was not able to stand up to Dr. Brandon either.
Let me talk to you about a few of them specifically. You covered the firearm expert. I don't think we need to spend any more time on him. He can stay in Alabama. Tell me about the initial officer, what he or she said contradicted the prosecution.
So first of all, the purpose of him, I think, was the prosecution showing that Marsha Thompson had admitted it. She had right away said, I shot my husband. So they wanted him there because he had heard her say those words. He was the first person there and he had heard those words. But when he was describing the body, he was describing it as like hunched over in a way. And I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was different than what the ME was saying in terms of, well, how was the body found, right? Like, how did the body look when it was found? And so there was another report from another officer that the ME was relying on, but really the body must have been moved in some way, likely by life-saving efforts, right? So they tried to save his life. They tried to probably do CPR and things like that. So the body is moved around, but then you have, okay, well, the ME in his report is relying on, this is what the body looked like. Right. And the person, the firearms expert who is saying, well, this shot came in this time and this shot came in this time, is also relying on, well, what did the body look like right after it was shot? But meanwhile, that's not what it looked like. What they were relying on was not actually what it looked like. They were relying on how it had been moved after they tried to save his life.
Right. And this guy was the only person who could say how it looked before his body was ever moved.
Correct.
One of the things I do, and I'm sure you probably do, in jury selection, I'm always asking the jury if they will wait until I've had a chance to cross-examine the state's witnesses before they determine whether or not the witness is believable. This is how I do it. In almost every jury selection, I give them a real-life cross-examination example. I'll say, imagine there's a car crash and there's a witness, and the witness says, I saw car A hit car B. Then the police get to the scene. The witness tells the police, I saw car A hit car B. The witness tells the prosecutor, I saw car A hit car B. And then finally the case goes to trial. The prosecution asks the witnesses what happened. And the witness says, I saw car A hit car B. At that point, my question to the jury is, who thinks it would be a good idea for me to stand up and ask the witness what happened next? Or what happened? And then I say, this is how a real life cross-examination goes. If it's my turn, I'm going to ask the witness, did you see that lady walking across the street? And the witness responds, yes. What was she wearing? And the witness says, a red dress. Did she have anything in her hand? The witness says, a purse. Was she attractive? The witness says, yes. And then I ask the witness, what took your attention off of her? And the witness says, I heard a crash. And I tell the jury, that is how a cross-examination happens in real life. And that is what I need y'all to give my client this week. Can you agree to wait until I've had a chance to cross-examine the witness before you decide if that testimony or what parts of that testimony you should believe or not?
Yeah, that's good. That's really good.
Let's talk about the medical examiner. What did he or she say on direct, and how did you deal with that on cross?
So I had a trial partner with me who came to trial, and she's the one who cross-examined the medical examiner. And she was fully prepared and ready, but we didn't expect him to change anything, right? I mean, he's the medical examiner. They typically don't change anything. It's pretty simple. They stick to their report and they stick to their deposition, right? So I think he was confused, maybe overworked, didn't pay attention. There's no way he read his deposition transcript before he came to this murder in the first degree trial, right? There's just no way he did, because I don't think he ever would have said it, because it wasn't like he was coming in and he was like, listen, I have to tell you, I think I was wrong. It wasn't that. It was that he said these things. They did not match what he had said in the deposition. It goes from the guy is asleep to now saying he was sitting, likely sitting, or maybe lying down when he had previously said he was asleep. Right. And so the reason he again was the second medical examiner. So the initial medical examiner who actually did the autopsy left that office. So they had to replace with him. So the state is already kind of battling. This is what happens when a case lasts 6 years, right? People die, people don't work there anymore, people move away, things like that. So the state's already battling that he's not the person who did the autopsy. And we're sort of harping on that. That's the thing that we're looking at. We're also kind of getting him to say that ultimately he doesn't know. He knows some things, but there's not much that he can know for sure in terms of which shots came first or what was happening when the shots came in. So we're busy establishing all those things that we planned to establish based on what he had said at the deposition. And he sort of hits us with this whole sitting up. And we're thinking like, yay, whenever there's sort of like a big change that's unexplained. And then my partner was confronting him on, well, you said this last time. And initially he's like, well, I can't remember. So then he had to be confronted with his deposition transcript. And these things just look so bad to a jury, right? And so when I'm giving my closing argument, I'm able to say, listen, we know that Marsha Thompson shot him. I don't need to talk to you about gun experts, any of this stuff, but I will take a few minutes to refute this evidence because it matters and you need to hear it. The medical examiner's wrong. The expert was like a joke. The other expert also couldn't stand up to Dr. Brandon, didn't bring anything that was useful. And so I was able to go through each and every one of their witnesses and sort of break down the evidence that they tried to present, which again, it's interesting because they kept this case going for so long. They were the ones pushing the case off, not me. They kept it going for so long. And they also didn't make an offer. And that's something important I wanted to tell you is that typically you have offers, like in almost every case. When you have a murder case and there's no offer, it's because it is just unexplainable, right? If you have a murder case and there's no offer, it's because the state is just like, no, we're not letting anybody get away with this. This is like somebody killed a child or somebody, things that are really, really extreme
Somebody killed a lady and drove around with her body on the front
with her
passenger seat
body,
for
right?
30 days. I didn't get an offer on that case.
No plea offer. And that will happen, right? But when you have a case where there is a documented history of abuse, there's also a documented history of the decedent being violent, not just with Marsha Thompson, but with prior people and other people and outside people. So when you have that, you expect an offer. It might not be a good offer, right? If they would have told me 20 years or 15 years or 10, even 10 years, my client probably would have said no. But there was no offer in this case in 5.5 years. Like the state did nothing to try to resolve this case. I think they thought what everybody thought was the case could not be won, right? And so
I
they were
think
just going to
so.
get whatever they could. But that was not the right thing to do because even if you don't agree with the defense, that there's mitigating information here. This is not like life in prison without parole offense.
One thing I always say is that the prosecutor and the criminal defense attorney, we don't have the same role in our system. Like the prosecutor's role is to prosecute crimes, and if they feel the person is innocent or there's some mitigating factors, they're supposed to take that into consideration and either dismiss the case or offer a plea deal that's appropriate for the crime, right? And the circumstances. Our job as a criminal defense attorney is to defend our client no matter what. I sincerely hate when, in certain cases, it appears that what the prosecution is willing to do depends solely on how they perceive their chances of winning. Not what's right, but are the cards stacked in my favor in this case? That's just not what it's supposed to be.
It's not. And I know a few prosecutors who really do their job and they do what they're supposed to do. They have compassion, they have perspective, but majority of what I work up against and what I was working up against in this case is not that. There is no perspective. And I really think it degrades the profession and the position because if that's the case, then we can just put a monkey or a robot in that seat to prosecute. And it goes to the same with judges, and why most of us don't agree with mandatory minimum sentences and things like that, because the whole point to have someone there is to have someone who we can hopefully trust their discretion, and that they will actually listen to the unique circumstances of whatever it is that's going on. So to have a prosecutor just offer, life, 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 and not really consider anything else, I think degrades their position.
It does. Now, it does make it easier for you to get ready for trial because I'm going to trial no matter what.
Right.
The prosecutor's a man or a woman or
A
both?
woman.
Okay.
A
What
woman.
is she?
Two women.
Two
Mhm.
women? Tell me about their closing argument and how you deal with their closing argument in your own closing argument.
So they get to break it up. They get a sandwich in closing. So in Florida, the state goes first, and then they get to go last. They get to rebut the defense, right?
It's like that here. It's terrible. But
That's what it is.
I interviewed somebody last week or the week before, and in closing, the defense goes first and the prosecution goes second. There's no rebuttal.
Wow. It's interesting. All of it's
Yep.
really interesting. This is how it's always been here. So I'm used to it, right? So they did what they sometimes do, which is they split it up. So one did one part, and then one of them did the rebuttal part. I thought everything they had to say was kind of uninteresting. They were just harping on the fact that she did it, and this is how we know she did it, and we know that he's unarmed. And, I can easily refute that by just explaining, like, we're not saying otherwise. So they're not really giving you anything. And then they ended with, like, Terry Thompson might not have been a great guy, and maybe he did some things wrong, but he should have been prosecuted, not executed, and I've heard this line before. And yeah, and that was like their big finish. I mean, it might be new for the jury. For me, I was not impressed. I don't think there was any kind of great argument that they could have made, right? I think where the prosecution went wrong was not either dismissing this case fully or trying to resolve this case. I think that's where they went wrong. They were never going to have anything powerful to say. They knew their experts were weak. They knew my expert was super strong, and they knew Marsha Thompson was truthful, was reliable, was believable, and they knew she would be liked. So they didn't have much.
She testify or she didn't?
She did. She
Oh,
did testify.
how did we skip over that?
She absolutely did testify. You can watch it. Yeah.
Give us the highlights of her testimony, because I'm going to watch it and I'm going to encourage others to watch it as well.
Yeah, it was hard. It was really, really hard for her. I can tell you that I love to prepare my clients to testify, whether it's criminal court, whether it's family court. First of all, I'm a big believer in testifying, even in criminal court, even if you have priors. If you have something to say, I want you to testify without the fear, right? I'll explain everything, right? It's all about being authentic and genuine. A lot of things can be forgiven if there's authenticity. If there's authenticity, the jury will believe you, right? If it's true, it will resonate. So if we have that as an option, I like it. I love it. A lot of people said I shouldn't put her on the stand, right? That, of course, that's like the general idea. And I didn't want to prepare her because like I said, in all those years, there was a lot that we hadn't even discussed. And even in our preparation before trial, she was revealing things to me I never heard before. I mean, I sat with this woman in this office, and I had to take a pause and leave the room because I could not listen to the things she was saying. She had to live them. I couldn't even hear them. I couldn't even accept that these things happened to her. That's how horrible they were, right? So we know we're going into trial, and I did not want to tell her what my questions were going to be or over prepare her like I usually would do, because I wanted the realness to shine through. And so I didn't tell her what my questions would be. And I also went into it knowing that her capabilities were not what I can do. She's not going to be able to explain every detail of what happened to her. So I had to think of a way to help her in my questioning and to sort of craft the questions so that it didn't leave too much open for her. And I also prepared her for which incidents specifically I would ask about. And we also made decisions not to talk about certain incidents. Some of them were the worst ones, but she was not able to say the words. She couldn't say the words. And so the jury didn't even hear about some of the worst things that happened to her.
55% of communication is nonverbal. So just the jury getting to see your client and feel the emotion of what she lived is more powerful than the words themselves coming out of her mouth. 10% of believability is based on the actual words, and then there's 35% is body language, and 45% is other nonverbal cues that we instinctively pick up from each other.
I think so too. And a lot of times, not always, there are some people who don't get believed when they're being truthful. And that's a very, very sad thing. But I think more often than not, when you're telling the real truth, people do see it and they believed her. And another thing that was really hard is that her whole family is sitting in that room, right? So,
And
she
they've
as
never heard this before. These things.
Sh-
Wow.
Exactly. So she has this just very shy, very closed off, insecure person who lacks confidence, who never discusses anything, let's say sexual, right? Having to describe the details of a rape with objects, right? While her mother and her father and her grandmother and her aunts and uncles and her cousins are all there in the courtroom listening. So it was really, really hard for her.
Let's go to the verdict. And as you guys are waiting on the verdict, one of the things I tell clients or anybody who asks, waiting on the verdict is actually the most difficult part of a jury trial.
It is just the absolute worst. Your mind plays tricks on you. It is the worst time. It is the worst time. It was the worst time.
How is your client doing during that time?
She was praying. Her and her family were mostly just sitting there and praying. She was calm. She handles herself, very, very calmly. I was kind of trying to stay away from them because I don't know what to say to them. And I don't know about you, but my pet peeve is jury questions. I don't want the jury coming with no questions. Like the second they come with a question, that's it. I hate them, right? I don't want to hear any questions.
My heart skips a beat every time. It's like, what?
Their questions are like a direct threat to me, right? Like, I don't want to hear questions. And occasionally I hear the question and I'm like, oh, this is going good for us. But typically, I don't think it's good or it's very confusing. In this case, it was very, very confusing. They came out with questions, and one of them was they wanted to see the laptop that Terry Thompson, her husband, had been on just around the time of the shooting. So there was blood on it, right? So I'm left to think, like, what do they care about blood on a laptop? I already told you he was beating her for 20 years. Like, what is this question? So that's where my head is at, and I'm really upset. And we're going on 4 hours. I think they deliberated for between 4 and 5 hours, which I'm thinking, like, this is a quick not guilty verdict. But really, you got to think about it. I know they needed their time. They needed time. It's a murder case and things like that. But it was such a hard time. It was a really, really hard time. But when we went in and they had the verdict and they came out, this one woman, and she was interviewed later by the news, she just kind of smiled and winked at me. And I knew it was going to be good. I mean, my feeling anyway was going to be good. I'm very into manifesting, and I've been like meditating for years and telling Marsha, like, I'm already walking you out the door. Like, all I ever pictured was walking her out the door. And so I already knew it was good. But when I saw this woman, her name was Gail, and I saw the look on her face, I knew we were good. And when I saw the judge looked like she was going to cry, and I was like, oh, it's a good day. Like, it's a good day, people. It's a good day for justice over here.
You're lucky your judge didn't do like there was some case where it was a not guilty verdict and the judge said guilty, and one of the jurors was like, that's not our vote, and then the judge like, oh, I misread, not guilty.
I misread. I told you what was in my heart instead of
That's
what I
right.
saw.
That's exactly right.
It was really good. And the jurors, a lot of them, I mean, there was one that surprised me because everybody told me afterwards what was going on back there. And you always get a little surprise. And the one person that we all felt great about actually wasn't with us. And she was like a holdout as to why it was taking so long. But mostly they were good and they were all very invested. We didn't leave the room for probably 2 hours after because there was so much going on. And two of the jurors were just waiting outside the courthouse for us. They were insisting to talk to us. And one of them came on the news, I think the next day or the day after, and kind of discussed also the case and how she felt about it and everything. So the jurors were definitely very invested. Another one called me maybe a few weeks later and just kind of wanted to talk to me about it. And it turns out he was like our champion. He was the one who was saying not guilty. He said from the
See,
very first day.
if you would run with stereotypes or assumptions, you wouldn't have picked a man to lead the verdict the way it did. But that brings me to a point I'm always reminding lawyers is the things we shouldn't pick juries based on, we really shouldn't. We shouldn't pick juries based on race. We shouldn't pick juries based on sex.
We have to base it on all those things. We have to base it on all those things. I know this is not going to make me popular,
Go ahead, I
right?
gotta hear this.
Absolutely have to base it on those things. It's unfortunate, but it's a reality. And I took a young woman to trial once on a case that I told her before we went in. I was a public defender and I was nothing but a winner, right? I was a public defender. I was a star. I was winning cases left and right. I couldn't get a guilty verdict, right? And I told this girl, a monkey could win your case, right? A monkey could win your case, but we didn't win. And afterwards, I had to tell her a monkey could have won it if we would have had any black jurors, but an all white jury,
Oh,
it's not going to work. It's
no,
not going to work.
no. If there's an all black jury, that means that means
No, it
they.
was an all white jury. It was an all white jury,
If it was
and
an
my client was a young black girl.
yeah, that's I've had
Didn't
those.
work. And this was a case where she weighed 100 pounds pregnant, and police were saying that she assaulted them because she threw Skittles at them and kicked them in the shins. And yet they had no proof, no body cam, they had no bruises, no pictures, they had nothing. We had a witness who was there during the stop who said it didn't happen, but this jury still said guilty. Right. And that's the day that I learned a very tough lesson. And I have never made that mistake again. And I don't care if I have no more challenges, I will find a way. I don't
No.
care what happens. You will not find me going to jury trial with an all white jury.
So I don't disagree with that at all. I agree 100% with that. I've had a trial, and I believe the guy was innocent. He
Those are the
was a
hardest ones. That's
it
the
was
worst.
it still
Yeah.
bothers me, and it happened at least 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. But it was a young black guy. He was accused of armed robbery. And the allegations are the robber went into the store, jumped on the countertop, which was plexiglass, had palm prints, and essentially DNA, you would imagine. The plexiglass was taken from the scene by the police. They claim they lost it, so it was never tested for fingerprints or DNA. The little Asian lady said the robber had his face covered to here and here. All you could see was the eyes. And the client was about my complexion, and she said she recognized him because of his eyes. He had brown eyes, and I was like, oh, most black people have brown eyes. How is that a distinction? Have you ever seen any black person with blue eyes? No, we mostly have brown eyes. But anyway, it was an all-white jury, and they found him guilty, and it haunts me. But that, and I think an all-white jury is not a fair cross-representation of the population.
No, it's not.
So that's where I say we shouldn't pick solely based on race, because somebody must have either there was very few minorities in the panel, or somebody used race alone to exclude them all, and that's problematic.
Yes, it is. Absolutely.
This is what I tell a lot of my guests. I can probably say this. There are still things that I feel I can say that a white person can't say because they won't be ridiculed for it. What I want to say is there was things I was taught growing up that I had to learn to reject. And one time I will never forget, I picked a jury. A client was accused of armed robbery, shooting up a motel with AK-47. And the juror, who I did not want to pick for subconscious things that were going through my mind, was an old white guy with long hair and a long beard, and he had tattoos, and everything I had been taught was this is the kind of white person you want to stay away from. That's just what I was taught. Now, had I taken that and ran with it, it probably would have worked to the detriment of my client. Everything about that gentleman made me say, this guy is not this stereotype that's been ingrained in me. This guy is just who he is, and he's showing me who he is. And we selected him to be on the jury. He ended up being the foreman, and my young black client was found not guilty. And he was
Amazing.
the driving force. And had I let my stereotype or subconscious teachings come into play, I would have gotten rid of him based on a reason I shouldn't be allowed to get rid of him.
I get that. I get that. And I totally agree. And I think another lesson for that is intuition, right? You know how we said you need to show that you care, but you also need to be prepared in doing that legal work. And you got to have some amount of intuition because if not, you're not going to pick the right jury.
That's
You're just
right.
not going to pick the right jury. You have to be able to see that skin color, age, gender, they do matter, but they're not everything.
What would you say this case taught you?
This case taught me so much. Like I said, I consider Marsha a very good friend and her family. I think it taught me a lot about domestic violence. You know, it's Domestic Violence Awareness Month right now, and I've been kind of posting on social media. And even before this case, because I do family and criminal, I really have a niche with domestic violence, like where I have cases where it's a divorce, they've also have a restraining order, they're also been accused of domestic violence, and then you have the case in criminal court with the domestic violence. And what I learned that I think is important, one is that anybody can be a victim. And there's really a lot of judgment out there. Everybody wants to say, well, they could have left. They could have left. They should have left. What? She has free will. She could leave. There's not a lot of understanding for the psychology of it and really the fact of what goes on when you become a victim of this cycle of violence. And when you ask the question or when you say, well, they should have left, you're placing the blame on someone who's a victim. It's
That's
like
right.
you're looking at someone who's a hostage in a bank vault and you're saying they should have left. Well, there's a gun to their head, right? You can't forget about that. So instead of placing the blame on the hostage, let's look at the person with the gun, right? Let's look at the person doing the criminal behavior. Let's look at the person doing the violence. So I think even though it was by no means my first experience with domestic violence or even with battered spouse, it really opened my mind so much to see someone like this who is such a clear victim and what happened to her. So it really taught me a lot.
I think we need to get to the point where we no longer blame the victims of domestic violence. Nobody would blame a rape victim for being raped, and this situation is very similar. You lose your personal autonomy, somebody takes advantage of you physically and does whatever they want to do to you. I love this story, not because your client endured 20 years of abuse, but because you were able to get justice for her in the end. And I'm going to broadcast this episode to, help shine some light on domestic violence and how it can go undetected for decades.
Absolutely. And even with a supportive, loving family, with a career, even with all of that, it could still go undetected. And a woman who is a victim could be living with what would be unthinkable or unspeakable.
Well, I appreciate you coming on to do this, Jessica. And one of the things I like to do at the end of the show is to help the public find great attorneys. So if there's someone out there who is looking for you or who needs somebody like you, how would that person find you?
So my office number is 561-833-2772. My email is mishalilaw@gmail.com, or my website is mishalilaw.com. And I'm located in Boca and Fort Lauderdale, but I practice all over Florida. This has been so great. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really enjoyed it.
All right. Well, this was a pleasure. I'd love to bring you back for the next not guilty verdict you get.
Got to make it happen. I have a couple of things in the works right now, so I'll keep you posted.
Okay, great. Thanks. And take care.
You as well. Bye bye.
This is the Iron Gavel Podcast, where trial lawyers share the stories behind not guilty verdicts and case dismissals. Subscribe now and share it with anyone who believes in fighting for justice.